Okay, welcome today to another one of our vitamin D study hours hosted by Grassroots Health, where we do a quick review of the research that's out and then open up the session for questions and answers. Today, I am happy to introduce Dr. William Grant, and our topic for the day is the disconnect between vitamin D research and recommendations. So, Dr. Grant has his PhD in physics. He has been studying vitamin D, however, since 1999 and is the author of over 300 peer-reviewed papers that link vitamin D and sunlight exposure to chronic disease prevention, including cancer, cardiovascular disease, and infectious diseases. He is also one of the Grassroots Health Scientist Panel members, and he's the founder and director of the Sunlight Nutrition and Health Research Center, or SUNARC, and you can find them at sunarc.org. And Dr. Grant is one of the biggest supporters of Grassroots Health, and I want to extend a huge thank you to you, Dr. Grant, from myself and my team. You've really contributed a lot to our operations, as well as global understanding of the health benefits of sunlight and optimal vitamin D status. So today, a couple of the papers that we suggested for your homework were two that Dr. Grant is a co-author on, Vitamin D and Cardiovascular Health, a narrative review of the reduction evidence, and vitamin D, evidence-based health benefits and recommendations for population guidelines. And I also want to mention that we just released a special video recording. It's a presentation by Dr. Robert Haney, who was our research director here at Grassroots Health, amazing vitamin D researcher. And he also authored one of the studies that Dr. Grant will be reviewing today on nutrient study design. So I will be sending a link to that video after this presentation. So a couple of quick notes before we begin. Please submit your questions into the question and answer box, not the chat box. I enabled chat today just to give it a try. It's been disabled, but we'll see how it goes. Hopefully everybody here finds it helpful and not distracting. And so questions have been submitted prior to the webinar, and those will be answered first. Personal medical questions will not be addressed. And yes, we are recording this, and we will be posting the recording to our website and sharing it through email to everybody who has registered. Remember, Grassroots Health offers home blood spot testing as part of our D Action study. You can go and get your home blood spot test for vitamin D and several other health markers at grassrootshealth.net. And before we start, just a reminder, there will be no study hour next week. Happy Thanksgiving to you guys. Our following Wednesday on the 3rd of December, we will be having Dr. Sunil Wimalawansa on to talk about the calcium-magnesium ratio and how it relates to vitamin D. And then the next one we have scheduled is on the 17th with Dr. Richard Chang, who will be discussing vitamin D resistance, what it is, what to do about it, why it happens, and anything you might want to know about vitamin D resistance. So again, you can submit questions ahead of time at our website, or you can always email me, jen@grassrootshealth.org, with additional questions, stories, feedback, anything that you'd like to mention about these webinars. Donations, of course, are always welcome and appreciated. It's the end of the year. Grassroots Health is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we run off of our vitamin D kit sales, but also really, really need those donations to come in. So again, email me if you have questions, or you can donate at our website. And I do want to mention that we are very happy to have some additional support and partners listed here, including Dr. Grant's organization, SUNARC. So with that, I am going to hand the screen over to Dr. Grant.
Okay. Thank you, Jan, for the introduction and for the invitation. Next slide. So, vitamin D policy is a story of independent research finding benefits of vitamin D supplementation versus the medical system trying to suppress the research and findings starting as early as 1974. Next. The outline for today is the background of the medical system in the US, how the biomedical system uses the Disinformation Playbook to oppose vitamin D, why vitamin D RCTs, randomized controlled trials, are not reliable, and how to conduct them properly, the 2024 Endocrine Society Vitamin D Guidelines, why observational studies are much more useful. Then there's Hill's criteria for causality in a biological system, and then a few of the health outcomes affected by vitamin D, including cancers, cardiovascular disease and stroke, COVID-19, Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Finally, summary and implications. Next. So the medical system in the US is based on income and profit from treating disease, not preventing it. Drugs that would be patented are preferred to supplements that cannot be patented because there's more income and more profit from patented drugs. Also, sick patients are preferred to well patients. The U.S. national health expenditures percentage of the gross domestic product from 2009 to 2023 has averaged 17%. On the other hand, on average in the European Union, it is estimated that the healthcare expenditure amounted to about 10% of GDP in 2017. Next slide. And this is a graph, a chart of life expectancy versus health expenditure per capita for a number of countries. The USA is on the far right, the most expensive of any country in the world, at around $12,000 to $13,000 per person. Yet the life expectancy is only about 76 years, which is way below the 83 or so for Europe. It's on par with Poland, which spends about a quarter as much for healthcare as the United States does. Next. So we have the U.S. healthcare agencies that control vitamin D policies. This includes the National Institutes of Health. For example, they fund vitamin D RCTs and limit the vitamin D dose, and it issues vitamin D fact sheets for health professionals. Then we have the Food and Drug Administration, which operates for the benefit of Big Pharma. And from their website, it says the vitamin D FDA recognizes vitamin D's essential role in helping the body absorb calcium and maintain bone health, which prevents conditions like rickets and osteoporosis. Vitamin D also supports muscle and immune functions and may play a role in cell growth and inflammation. But notes lacking from that is anything about any other benefits. And indeed, the FDA restricts manufacturers from saying that vitamin D has other benefits because they're not supported by RCTs. Next. Then we have the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The mission of the CDC is to protect health and promote well-being through research, information, and action with partners to improve health globally. However, the CDC has patents for many vaccines, especially for children, and the childhood vaccination schedule has climbed to 60 or 70 shots by 18 from the 3 or 4 when I was a child, when it was mainly smallpox and polio. It views vitamin D as competition and does what it can to discourage vitamin D. Next. Then we have the Institute of Medicine, which is not a U.S. government agency. And it issued the guidance in 2011 that people from ages 1 to 7 years should have 600 IU per day vitamin D, and those over from 71 on should have 800 IU per day. This report was orchestrated by Big Pharma to discourage optimal vitamin D supplementation in terms of the members of the committee and the recommendations. The next slide. Okay, well, so this is how vitamin D uses the big acceptance is delayed by Big Pharma following Disinformation Playbook. Now, I analyzed that in 2018 based on the Union of Concerned Scientists analysis. And so here's the Disinformation Playbook from the UCS. First, there's the fake. conduct counterfeit science and try to pass it off as legitimate research. And I put the vitamin D um, trials controlled by NIH in that category. Second, there's the blitz, harassed scientists who speak out with results or views inconvenient for industry. Michael Hollick, the leading vitamin D spokesperson in the United States, was was harassed in a New York Times article in 2018 for taking money from the indoor tanning industry and from vitamin companies. Um, Third, there's the diversion, manufacture uncertainty about science where little or none exists. So here's Big Pharma uh, trying to say that because clinical RCTs do not show vitamin D is beneficial, maybe the observational studies shouldn't be believed in. And here's one of the big ones, the screen. Buy credibility through alliances with academia, professional societies, and advertising in the mass media. So universities are funded by the NIH and FDA to study drugs, and as a result, they are reluctant to promote vitamin D. Professional societies all take money from big pharma. The mass media, TV and print media, take a lot of advertising money from big pharma, and again are very reluctant to promote vitamin D. And finally, the fix: manipulate government officials or processes to influence policy and appropriately. So the three main organizations, NIH, FDA, and CDC, have the chief leaders of those have a revolving door with big pharma. They work with these organizations for a while and go back to big payroll in big pharma. And so they know that they're being watched and uh, they uh, they do work accordingly. Next, here's an example of one of the fact sheets from the NIH. It says there's no benefits even in vitamin D, even in reducing progression from prediabetes to type 2 diabetes as of June 27, 2025. But as I'll show later, there was a report in 2020 from Tufts University regarding their vitamin D supplementation study that indeed vitamin D supplementation did reduce progression from prediabetes to diabetes. Next. The mainstream medical journals are also involved in this. They are part of the advertising arm for big pharma. So beneficial findings for vitamin D are rarely reported in these journals. If there are beneficial effects, they may not be included in the abstract, just in the text. Instead, they prefer to publish studies finding that vitamin D supplementation had no benefits. Thus, physicians generally do not know about the benefits of vitamin D. As a result, I publish most of my vitamin D studies in Nutrients. Next. So the thesis of this presentation is that vitamin D RCTs have not, in general, been designed to test whether vitamin D supplementation reduces risk of disease, incidence, progression, or mortality rates. Thus, observation studies and Hill's criteria for causality should be used as the basis for recommendations on vitamin D supplementation and serum 25-OHD concentrations. Next. So another example of big pharma putting its handprints all over this is the Indian Society Clinical Practice Guideline for 2024, with authors DeMay and Pittas, among others. It was based only on results from vitamin D RCTs. It suggested the 2011 guidelines, essentially the empiric vitamin D supplementation of 600 to 1,000 IU per day for children and adolescents, 800 IU per day for those aged 75 and older. Also, pregnant women should be taking vitamin D and those with high risk prediabetes. But and then for people older than 50 years, for whom vitamin D is indicated, the panel suggests supplementation via daily supplementation of vitamin D. The panel recommended against screening for low 25-OHD except where it's considered cost effective. But it made no recommendations for vitamin D levels considered deficient, inefficient, or sufficient. And as you can imagine, this article generated a lot of anxiety among the vitamin D researchers, but was embraced by much of the medical system. Next. So going back to 2011, Michael Hollick led a committee for the Endocrine Society that set the recommendations for deficiency at less 25 OAD less than 20 nanograms per milliliter, insufficiency 20 to 30 nanograms per milliliter, and sufficiency greater than 30 nanograms per milliliter or 75 nanomoles per liter. They suggest that all adults aged 19 to 70 require at least 600, and those over 71 years, 800 IU of vitamin D per day, respectively. However, for those to raise the blood level of 25 OH to above 30 nanograms per milliliter may require at least 1,500, 2,000 IU per day of vitamin D supplementation. And note that this paper had a total of 8,600 Scopus citations and almost 15,000 Google citations, including 636 in 2025. Next. So the basis for this presentation is our papers responding to the DeMay et al. Paper. And notice that the first one is the highest vitamin D cited vitamin D paper in 2025 with 72 Google Scholar citations and 47 Scopus citations. Whereas the DeMay et al. Paper has 344 Google Scholar citations and 217 Scopus citations in total. Next, from our response to DeMay et al. In the abstract, the health outcomes discussed in this review are presented for 8 of the 10 leading causes of death in the U.S. for 2021 and 2022. They are in descending order of death rates: heart disease, cancer, COVID-19, stroke, chronic lower respiratory diseases, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes mellitus, and kidney disease. No effects were discussed for chronic liver disease and accidental deaths, although vitamin D may play a role there as well. Next. So randomized controlled trials were designed for pharmaceutical drugs. In those trials for drugs, the control group does not receive the drug. The treatment group receives a dose calculated to result in a significant benefit. Analysis is by comparing outcomes for treatment versus control, that is for the two different groups. But on the other hand, the vitamin D RCTs enroll mostly participants with high 25 OHD concentrations, give low vitamin D doses, give or permit vitamin D supplementation by their control group, and analyze outcomes according to intention to treat. Most vitamin D RCTs have not found benefits or harms by vitamin D supplementation. Next. So as Robert Heaney has outlined, and you'll see in the video that is posted, that use observational studies for the 25 OHD concentration health outcome response of interest. Measure 25 OHD concentration of prospective participants and enroll those with low 25 OHD concentrations for the disease of interest. Give a vitamin D dose calculated to significantly reduce risk. Do not give the control group any vitamin D. Also give both groups vitamin D cofactors so the trial will be sensitive only to vitamin D. Measure 25 OHD during the trial and adjust vitamin D dose as needed. Analyze results in terms of achieved 25 OHD concentrations. That was Heaney in 2014, and I organized a related paper in 2018. Next. So here's an example. This is given by Bruce Hollis last week of a trial conducted in Iran. This was 2 hospitals in 2 cities from were selected as a screening and non-screening arms respectively, with 900 women in each, pregnant women in each site, or 800 pregnant women in each site. Women were randomly divided into 4 subgroups and received vitamin D3 to delivery. The main outcome measure was maternal concentration of 25 OHD at delivery and rate of pregnancy complications. Next. After supplementation, only 2% of the women in the non-screening site met the sufficiency level, which was above 20 nanograms per milliliter, versus 53% of the women in the screening site. And the adverse pregnancy outcomes, including preeclampsia, gestational diabetes mellitus, and preterm delivery, were decreased significantly by 60, 50, and 40% respectively in the screening site. A vitamin D3 injection in addition to monthly 50,000 IU maintenance therapy contributed to most of the achievement of sufficient levels at time of delivery. Next. Now, turning here to Hill's criteria for causality and biological system. These were outlined by A. Bradford Hill in 1965 in a presentation to the Royal Medical Society in the UK. And this is an alternative scientific way to examine causality. So the criteria appropriate for vitamin D include strength of association between, say, 25 OHD and health outcome, consistency of findings in different populations, temporality, in other words, you want the concentration measure before the outcome. You want to find a biological gradient, plausibility, such as mechanisms to support the finding, coherence with the science of the day, experimental verification, such as vitamin D supplementation studies, analogy with other health outcomes, and others added later consider confounding factors and remove bias. Now note that not all criteria need to be satisfied to claim causality, but the more there are, the better. And it turns out observational studies can be used to examine most of these criteria. Next. So let's turn now to four of the types of health outcomes where vitamin D has been studied for a long time. For cancer, we have the geographical ecological studies, observational studies based on 25 OHD concentrations, randomized controlled trials, and mechanisms. And I have published a paper with Alberto Munoz in 2022 that is a very, very comprehensive overview of the epidemiological mechanisms related between vitamin D and cancer, open access. Next. So I got my start on vitamin D in 1999 when the Institute of Medicine and the National Institute of Health and National Cancer Institute published their Atlas of Cancer Mortality in the United States, which it turns out is now available open access online with all the maps for about 20 types of cancer. Now, what they did was they took two time zones, 1950, 1969, and 1970, 1994, and looked at mortality rates in each of about 500 state and economic areas throughout the United States. And they have now 10 color scales. The darkest red is the highest mortality rates, darkest blue is the lowest mortality rates. And you see for breast cancer, the highest rates, adverse risk mortality rates are in the Northeast, upper Northeast, and in California, especially along the coast. The lowest rates are in the South and a little bit in the upper Northwest. I worked at NASA at that time, and I was aware of the solar UVB doses measured from the total ozone mapping spectrometer for 305 nanometers. And if you see there, the blue, dark blue is very lowest in Canada. The pink in New Mexico and Arizona is the highest. And I noticed that the asymmetry was very similar between the DNA UVB and the cancer maps. So I spent a year or two digitizing the DNA UVB data to the state economic areas and finding correlations. And the next graph shows the correlation between the individual mortality rates as a function of the UVB and the mortality rate for breast cancer. And there you see there's a 45% higher mortality rate for 3.5 kilojoules per meter squared versus 10 kilojoules per meter. And as I may have mentioned on the last slide, the period 1950-1994 was a period when not many people were obese. People spent a lot of time in the sun. For example, when I was a child in the 50s and 40s, I would go out and get sunburned every summer and tan. I never got skin cancer. I never got internal cancer. Um, and um, uh, and people, so It was just a different, and now we have high obesity rates. We have people avoiding the sun. We have staying indoors. We have people using sunscreen and sunblock. Even um, um, uh, the women wear face makeup that has sunscreen in it. So we're blocking out a lot of the UVB, and we have much better cancer treatment. So we're losing the ability to see the effect of vitamin D on mortality rate. But the data from that period are very, very strong in showing that vitamin D does reduce mortality rates and by implication also incidence rates. Next. Now in 2010, we had enough case control studies of colorectal cancer and 2508H. We could do a similar dose response relationship. And you can see here below 50 nanomoles per liter or 20 nanograms per liter, below that you have a very strong increase in the risk of colorectal cancer incidence as 2508H decreases, and very little change after that. Next slide. So now we turn to the RCT, this $36 million RCT conducted by Harvard University, controlled by the NIH. It enrolled over 25,000 participants, but notice that the baseline 25-OHD concentration in the vitamin D treatment arm was approximately 31 nanograms per milliliter. The vitamin D dose was set at 2,000 IU per day, but all participants could also take 600 to 800 IU per day of vitamin D3 and spend as much time in the sun as they wish. As a result, in the vitamin D treatment arm, the achieved 25-OHD was around 41 to 43 nanograms per milliliter, and we don't really know what it was in the control arm. Next. So this was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and in the abstract, it shows that there was no supplementation not affected associated with lower risk of either of the primary impact points, which were total cancer and total cardiovascular disease. And for some of the secondary findings, they said, oh, there's no significant effect there either. However, in the body of the article, participants with BMI less than 25 had a significant 25% reduced risk of all cancer incidents, and those with higher BMI did not have significant reductions. African Americans had a marginally non-significant 25% reduced risk of cancer incidence, and all participants had a significant 25% reduced risk of cancer mortality rate. This goes along with New England Journal of Medicine's policy of trying to discourage interest in vitamin D by having only one outcome in the abstract and bearing any positive effect in the interior, and hoping people do not read it. And all the press releases, all the discussion in the mass media did not mention the secondary beneficial findings of that study for cancer. Next slide. Now here's an observational study based on participants in various studies taking vitamin D. To the left, up to about 40 or 50 nanograms per milliliter, are people from the Lappy et al. Creighton University vitamin D randomized controlled trial of cancer incidence. In these studies, people were taking, participants in the treatment arm were taking about 1,000 IU of vitamin D per day, as well as about 1,000 milligrams of calcium per day. And on the right are mainly people from the grassroots health volunteer study who would have 25-OHD measure with a blood spot test and report their health outcomes. And you see there's a very significant difference between those with around 15 nanograms per milliliter and those around 70 nanograms per milliliter. If you look at the consider where the vital study was, it went from about 30 to 40. So that was just a very, very small change on this graph. And so it's not surprising they didn't find a beneficial effect in general. Next slide. Turning now to cardiovascular disease, mainstream medicine does not recognize that vitamin D reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease incidence, or death, since vitamin D RCT has not shown that it does. However, no vitamin D RCTs were designed and conducted to properly evaluate the observational study findings for CVD. None were based on participants at 25 would each less than 20 nanograms per milliliter. Next. So here we see the cardiovascular disease incidence versus serum 25-OHD as known in 2012, about the time that the VITAL study was being designed. And you see that most of the adverse effects occur below 20 nanograms per milliliter, 50 nanomoles per liter. You get to the 31 nanograms per milliliter, and above that, you're not going to see any effect of incidence. Next. And here's more recently from 2021, sees the same thing. This is for all-cause mortality. You don't see much benefit above 50 nanomoles per liter, 20 nanograms per milliliter. But you do see reductions in cardiovascular disease going out to 60 nanograms per milliliter, up to a 50% reduction compared to 20 nanograms per milliliter. Next slide. Now let me introduce a sort of a detail here about how to look at observational studies. This is our data from the Framingham study in Boston, Cambridge, Massachusetts area. This is 26-year study of systolic and diastolic blood pressure and blood cholesterol. What they did was they have hundreds, they had maybe 1,000, up to a little less than 1,000 people, and they measured their different variables and divided the participants into 5 quintiles. They each had 1/5 of the total population. They then kept remeasuring these values, these variables, every 2 years and plotted the results for the quintiles. And what you see is that the difference between the quintiles was reduced by about 50% or more as time went on. So that was because variable values are not fixed in time. People change diet, they change occupation, they change sun exposure, they change diet, disease rates, medication, etc. And so an observational study that only measures the variable values such as 25-OHD at one time and then measures for 10 or 20 years is going to lose a lot of information about the effect of vitamin D on the outcome, as is shown in the next few slides. Next. So here's the effect of follow-up period on the risk of stroke. So what we did here is we took prospective cohort studies in which baseline 25-OHD was used to examine the relative risk of stroke. They were comparing those who had greater than 30 nanograms per milliliter at baseline versus less than 10 or 20 nanograms per milliliter. So if you start at 1 year, you had about a 60% plus or minus reduction in stroke for those with a higher versus lower. But by the time you got to 10 years, you found no difference. And if you use all the data, you maybe found that, oh, maybe there was a 30% difference between high and low, when it was more like a 60% if you had a short time, follow-up time. Next slide. For major cardiovascular events, the effect is not so strong. And I think that's because a lot of the cardiovascular disease effects are not related to vitamin D. There are things like heart failure, which I think has not much to do with vitamin D. And there are other things like diet and cholesterol, et cetera, play roles. So, but there still is an effect of follow-up time. And so there's still some benefit for major cardiovascular events. Next. Go back to the VITAL study. They found no effects for the major cardiovascular disease or stroke, but that was expected based on the way the low vitamin D dose and the way they analyzed the data. Next. Now we do have an observational study of vitamin D supplementation and reduction of blood pressure from Canada. This was they were involved over 8,000 participants in a community-based program where they already had generally over 20 to 30 nanograms per milliliter, 25 OHD concentration, but a lot of them still had hypertension. They were provided with vitamin D supplements, around 5,000 IU pills, to try to reach a target 25 OHD concentration greater than 100 nanomoles per liter or 40 nanograms per milliliter. Note this is funded by Pure North Synergy Foundation, a private foundation. Here's the link to the paper in Nutrients. Next, at baseline, 7.3% of the participants hypertension. By the end of the year, 71% of those were no longer hypertensive. Mean systolic blood pressure reduced by about 14 to 18 milliliters of mercury, and diastolic by about 12 milligrams of mercury. And this is not significantly different between those who were not taking blood pressure lowering medication. Next slide. Sunil Wimalawansa has published a very good paper on vitamin D and cardiovascular diseases, in which he outlines what's known about the beneficial effects on improving cardiovascular disease uh, 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 um, with respect to vitamin D, as well as preventing reduction of vitamin D, cardiovascular disease by vitamin D. Next. Now, here's the pre-diabetes study from Tufts University. Note that they were using 4,000 IU per day of vitamin D at the same time that Vita was only using 2,000 IU per day. And another benefit was they were using people who were very likely to benefit from vitamin D because these were pre-diabetics. They had elevated plasma glucose and glycated hemoglobin level. And the next slide shows that the original analysis based on the traditional way of analyzing vitamin D RCTs, where they compared the outcome for those treated versus the outcome for those not treated, they found no significant benefit. There was a 12% reduction, but the 95% confidence interval still included 1.0, which means it was not significant, and therefore this was found not to show that vitamin D reduced the risk of conversion from prediabetes to diabetes. But the next slide shows that they had a change of analysis. They finally realized, oh my God, we've got to look at intra-trial 25 OHD level, not just whether we treated them or not. And what they found was that the hazard ratio, there's a risk for if they increase their 25 OH by 25 nanomoles per liter or 10 nanograms per liter, they had a significant 25% reduced risk of conversion to diabetes. They also found that if they got up to 50 nanograms per liter, they had a 71% significant reduction in compared to those between 20 and 30 nanograms per milliliter risk of conversion to diabetes. So somehow the NIH has overlooked this well conducted and peer reviewed published paper. Next slide. COVID-19. This paper um, uh, by members of Grassroots Health, myself, and suggested by Hope Benedict at Biotech Pharmacal, um, suggested that vitamin D supplementation would reduce the risk of COVID-19. It is the highest cited vitamin D paper in the last 5 years. Over 1,456 Scopus citations, over 2,600 Google Scholar citation. Yet the information of vitamin D and COVID-19 was blocked in the mass media and some of the social media because big pharma wanted to profit from vaccines which had not been tested by RCTs or reported in peer-reviewed journals, drugs and hospital treatment. And so um, it was difficult. The doctors who tried to use vitamin D in treating COVID patients often lost their accreditation and hospital privileges and so on. At the same time, um, big pharma was seeing to it through that that things like ivermectin were discouraged as well. Anything that was simple and cheap and prevented use of expensive treatments was discouraged in the COVID era, much to the adverse effect on health globally. Next. This shows a paper from Michael Hall and colleagues early on in September 2020, shows that those with 20 nanograms, 50 nanograms per milliliter had about um, um, 40% lower risk of SARS-CoV-2 virus positivity rates than those with less than 20 nanograms per milliliter, which is a good reason to take vitamin D and try to increase one's concentrations. Next slide. It's also been shown that the um, patients treated in a veterans hospital had about uh, significantly lower uh, hospitalization and mortality when they got up to 60 nanograms per liter, less than 12 nanograms, down to around 12 nanograms per milliliter. Next slide. There's also benefits for Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Again, using the follow-up studies shows this. So, of course, diet plays an important role, and obesity plays an important role. Air pollution plays a role, but vitamin D does play a role. Maybe uh, it's worthwhile taking vitamin D if you want to reduce your risk of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. Next slide. So, in summary, observational studies provide the best evidence that vitamin D reduces risk, progression, death for many um, diseases and conditions. Most vitamin D RCTs were not properly designed to evaluate the findings from observational studies. Thus, observational studies should be used for guidance regarding vitamin D doses of serum 25 OHD concentrations. Hill's criteria can be used to evaluate causality, and measurement of 25 OHD concentration after supplementing vitamin D is recommended because there are a lot of personal variations between vitamin D supplementation and achieved 25 OHD due to genetic and other reasons. Next. In conclusion, the medical system in the U.S. is operating the benefit of biomedical industry or big pharma. The U.S. health agencies have been under their control for decades. Mainstream medical journals are part of the advertising arm of big pharma. As a result, NIH-funded research was controlled and independent research was not published in the mainstream medical journals to limit the understanding of vitamin D's benefits. Now, note that the leadership of the NIH, FDA, and CDC have changed under the Trump administration, but it remains to be seen whether vitamin D will receive more respect. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. We do have some time for questions. So I will start with some of the ones that were submitted previously to the prior to the webinar. Um, If you were diagnosed with cancer, what would you do from day one with respect to vitamin D? Is vitamin D used as a matter of course as an adjunct in cancer, other illnesses, or surgery, or do doctors still try to say it blocks the treatment?
If I had cancer, I would definitely treat with vitamin D. For example, there's a randomized controlled trial from uh, Japan showing that people who have a special um, effect on the P53 gene, um, they have twice the reduction in mortality rate for GI tract cancer than those who don't have that. Um, there's also evidence that treating prostate cancer can maybe have some benefits, and there's evidence for breast cancer, et cetera. So I would definitely treat. I would want to raise my serum level above maybe above 60 nanograms per milliliter. And there are doctors who are using vitamin D as not as the main treatment, but as an adjuvant in the treatment of cancer.
Right. And I think I wish I remembered the name of the author, but there was a study just recently published, actually a couple of them over the last couple of years, showing added treatment effect from chemotherapy for those who did have cancer. Vitamin D increased the rate of survival and um, remission.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question, could aging be accelerated if there is insufficient vitamin D to control it? And could vitamin D insufficiency also potentially lead to Alzheimer's? And I believe you showed us that graph showing that yes, vitamin D insufficiency could lead to Alzheimer's, but what have you seen in regards to vitamin D and aging?
Okay. One of the factors related to aging is um, that telomeres, which are caps on chromosomes, um, they get thinner and thinner. I mean, the caps get thinner and eventually, I guess, almost disappear. And these caps protect the chromosomes from aging. And so it turns out that there are studies showing that vitamin D does help maintain these telomere caps. So that's one way that vitamin D does help reduce biological aging.
Okay, thank you. Also, I believe with the chronic inflammation and how that contributes to so many different diseases.
Right,
That's
plus
very good.
insulin resistance.
Yeah. Okay, so I have two similar questions. Is there a form of vitamin D that is more effective than others? Liquid, gel, drops, or tablets? And then have there been any studies on the difference of supplementing with topical vitamin D? And if so, how does it compare to oral?
Okay, there are actually several differences in types of vitamin D. As far as whether it's in a gel, lipid, or water or powder, it doesn't really matter. I mean, vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, but um, um, you can find it supplementing orange juice, which doesn't have any fat. Um, but the important thing is that you really want to take vitamin D3, not vitamin D2. Unfortunately, vitamin D2 is patented, so doctors often prescribe vitamin D2 even in treating cancer because they can get it from the pharmacy. It's much more expensive than vitamin D3 is almost free. $10 a year for all the vitamin D3 you need. Um, but vitamin D2 is not, vitamin D2 is made from yeast or fungi, and it's not as effective as vitamin D3. It has not been shown to be as effective. It doesn't stay in the body as long, et cetera, et cetera. So really make sure you're getting vitamin D3 cholecalciferol, not D2 ergocalciferol. Um, in terms of topical vitamin D, there have been some studies showing that yes, vitamin D3 on the skin, say in a gel, can penetrate the skin and help with the skin and even get into the bloodstream. Um, and it should be noted that the skin actually has the mechanism for converting pre the type of cholesterol that becomes vitamin D, vitamin D3, to becoming 25 OHD and 125 OH2 D3, where it can actually fight melanoma and perhaps skin cancer. So the skin is really receptive to vitamin D.
Right, right. Yeah,
Next.
and I do remember a study that we covered a while ago showing that topical vitamin D could also increase the level of vitamin D in the blood, the 25-OHD, and it was actually helpful for individuals with certain digestive issues and things like that. So, and you answered the next question about the next question was a friend has been prescribed vitamin D2 for hyperthyroidism by his doctor. Is this as good as vitamin D3? And you just answered that question. So the D3 is definitely the optimal choice
Right.
when we're comparing D2 to D3. So
Right.
we do have a few questions that have come in. Can you just briefly, for those who aren't familiar, what is Big Pharma?
Big pharma. That's a pejorative term for the pharmaceutical industry. Just like big ag, big food. It's these industries sort of have their own agents, organizations that promote their point of view, lobby, et cetera, and it's just a pejorative term that's come into vogue.
Kind of like money determines the power where the money is, right? In
Money
that
talks.
sense. Yeah, unfortunately. Vitamin D, I'll just make my little pitch right here. Vitamin D, addressing vitamin D insufficiency and deficiency is probably the cheapest, safest, most effective way to improve health.
That's right. That's right.
And it affects all different cell types and organs in our bodies.
Yeah.
And so I,
Let me point out that in the globally, probably about half the population has 25 OH below 20 nanograms per milliliter, at least in the winter. And if you were to raise all of them above 20 nanograms per milliliter, you'd have a tremendous impact on health outcomes.
mhm.
Big pharma doesn't want that.
hmm Oh, and there's been several studies, and I'm sorry, I'm going to take up some of the question and answer time
Okay.
right now. From, you reviewed the Pure North study that was done up in Canada, and Grassroots Health was a part of evaluating all of that data. And they implemented a protocol for all of their patients to basically measure vitamin D at baseline and calculate a dose of vitamin D to achieve a vitamin D level of 50. And they adjusted that dose. Again, the goal was to reach that target vitamin D serum level of 50, not to just give a blanket dose to everybody. And so this is going to kind of answer the next question that we have in terms of somebody asked, what dosage do you recommend? And you can certainly follow up with this. But what this study found, I believe you showed some of the findings in terms of the cardiovascular health for that group. But they also found findings showing a decrease in thyroid disorders, especially autoimmune thyroid disorders. They showed benefits for anxiety and depression. They showed benefits for insulin resistance. And so you do one thing with vitamin D and you're going to affect so many different outcomes. And that was another thing with the Vital study. They did find that those who took the vitamin D had what was it, a 23% decreased risk of developing autoimmune disease
Hmm.
during the trial. And so in order to figure out, though, how much vitamin D they needed to take, they had to measure the level and then retest to make sure that that dose was being effective. So I hope that answered the question that came in, and feel free to add to that, please.
Right. I forgot to mention, and perhaps the audience knows anyway, that vitamin D is not really a vitamin. It's not like vitamin C or vitamin E. It's really uh, operates primarily as a hormone. The 125 dihydroxyvitamin D goes to vitamin D receptors coupled to the nuclei, coupled to chromosomes in almost all cells in the body, where it controls gene expression, upregulating a number of genes, downregulating others. So that's why it can have effect on so many different health outcomes. And vitamin D3 itself is not doesn't has very little direct effect. It's really the hormonal version. And it turns out that in the blood, circulating blood, 125 dihydroxyvitamin D is used to help regulate serum calcium levels. But as organs need this hormonal version, they will actually take the circulating 25 OHD and convert it to 125. And so for about a decade, pharmaceutical companies were trying to develop um, synthetic uh, calcitriol or 125 dihydroxy that they wouldn't have calcemic effects on the blood, and they never did find ones that they could use for treating cancer. Um,
Right.
they forgot that they didn't realize that it was really the organ saying, "Hey, I need help.
Mhm.
Let's convert the 25 to 125."
Right, directly within the cells. So those cells take in both the D3 and the 25 OHD when in need, and they have all the mechanisms, all the enzymes to convert it into the 125 directly within the cells so that it has that tissue specific action. And
Amazing how the body works. It's amazing.
right, right. It's so unfortunate that that seems to be one of the key points about vitamin D that is ignored by certain institutions when they're creating these guidelines and looking at the different studies, and always seems to be falling back on, oh, well, vitamin D is only proven to be good for bone health. And I'd love to direct everybody to the grassrootshealth.net website where I just published a press release by Dr. Chang, and he mentions Dr. Grant as well as Henry Lahore, who listed, I think it was 19 different reasons that randomized controlled trials were designed to fail when it comes to vitamin D. And there's some really interesting ones in there, but also mentions some of that as well. Um, so I've got another question. So along with the slides, a text file, can we provide a text file with links to papers cited? I can certainly post the links along with the video, and anybody who wants to email me, Jen, at grassrootshealth.org, I can provide you with links to these studies. And okay, so here's another question. The vitamin D receptor slash retinoic acid, the VDR RXR dimer, requires one molecule of vitamin D, one molecule of vitamin A, and four molecules of zinc to form the dimer that acts as a DNA transcription factor. Also, all RNA polymerase that transcribes DNA requires magnesium. Why don't these RCT and observational studies include these cofactors? Good question.
Well, because they're designed to fail. And I think this information is probably becoming more apparent recently, and a lot of these trials were designed 15 years ago.
Mhm.
But that's definitely good. Magnesium is very important.
hmm Definitely. And again, we're talking about the design of the randomized controlled trial. It really is for pharmaceutical drugs. They were designed to look at only one intervention, and vitamin D we know does not work alone. And so it's got very important cofactors, including magnesium. And in the video I'm going to be sharing by Dr. Haney, he addresses this as well. But yes, there are many important co-nutrients to vitamin D.
Yes.
So the last question, because I know we've gone over a little bit in time today, toxicity level is quite high, so we shouldn't be concerned at 8,000 IU per day. And is that's a question?
That's probably correct. Um, there was a famous case of a vitamin mineral guru who was taking 1 million IU of vitamin D per day for a month or two or three, and he became very ill. And he went to Dr. Hollick for advice. And Dr. Hollick tested his 25 OHD and found it was up to 900 nanograms per milliliter, and found that the powder he was actually was his own manufactured powder where the manufacturer had confused milligrams and micrograms. Um, he put in instead of 1,000 IU per day, he put 1,000,000 IU per day in the scoop. And so Dr. Hollick helped him detoxify, mainly, I think there may be something to use, plus just sort of letting the vitamin D3 relieve his body. When it came down to about 400 nanograms per milliliter, the hypercalcemia went away, and he survived and went happy ever after. So the amount of there are the most people who get the hypercalcemia are get it because of manufacturing errors, not because they're taking 10,000 or 5,000 or 20,000 IU per day, but because of the manufacturing errors. And they don't really die. They become uncomfortable. They go to the doctor, find out what the problem was, they get over it. It's just like the dermatologists have been railing against sun exposure and sunburn, and where they use the sunblock. Well, um, that wasn't necessary years ago, and may even increase the risk of melanoma. But anyway, that's the way it goes.
Right, right. There's vitamin D toxicity is incredibly difficult to achieve. Very rare cases like the one that Dr. Grant mentioned. And I love how so many of our scientists put it. You should definitely fear vitamin D toxic or vitamin D deficiency and its health effects much more than you fear vitamin D toxicity. So I'm going to make one more comment that somebody sent in. You did not mention the file drawer effect when companies simply do not publish papers that do not suit the story they want to push. Use with good effect for antidepressants. Perhaps comment on this next time. But great comment. Thank you for sending that in. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I apologize for going over time today, but I'm glad you all stuck around. Dr. Grant, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, to have you on. And I just love sharing this information because it's really important. And I'm sure we could keep talking about it for another hour. But if anybody is interested in more on this topic, just again, email me. I can also forward additional questions to Dr. Grant if needed. And yeah, I appreciate your feedback and thank you again and have a great day.
Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for your questions.
All right, bye
All right.
everybody.